think one of the amazing aspects of the Iraq War, which is different than the war in Afghanistan. One was a war of choice, one was a war of necessity, and I agree with you on that. But that so many of the principal architects of it were alive and participants in the Vietnam era. So a couple weeks ago, I was in Vietnam and I was at the beach. And I'm literally looking at the spot with a coconut drink in my hand where the Marines come ashore in Da Nang in 1965.
Wow.
And the more time I've spent in Vietnam from a historical perspective, the fact that Ho Chi Minh's Declaration of Independence was written alongside an American OSS officer. It talks about all men are created equal. It's our Declaration of Independence. We were fighting these people because of why. All of the premises, right, were profoundly wrong, and it leads to one of the great tragedies in the country's history to be repeated within a generation in Iraq, which is extraordinary when you think about it. And so the question is, will this generation of veterans, as it assumes political leadership in the country over the next generation, learn from this mistake, or are we doomed to repeat it? Or have we finally learned some lessons about the limitations of American power?
I think we have learned a lot of lessons, but I can't say we've wholly learned it, right? I mean, there's plenty of Afghan or Iraq vets in public office who are hawkish in a grandstanding sort of performative way, but here's some of the lessons I'm pretty confident we've learned, some of which are thrust upon us, and one is just a basic lesson about hesitancy toward war that it will last at least for, I think, a few more years, maybe a decade, hopefully. But that's thrust upon us by the American people. That's just 20 years of fatigue, whether people went there or not. Like, people are like, whoa, hold up. And that interestingly seems to be one of the only bipartisan things in the country right now, is people like, no war for a while, right? That's good. And I do think a lot of it is driven by vets. I do think one of the hopefully enduring lessons that my generation of veterans will take from this is the manner in which you go to war. So whether or not it keeps us out of war is another question. But when I think back on, all of us experiencing Rumsfeld saying, hey, you go to war with the army you have, and I don't think most of us are ever going to forget that. And so I do think that while it may not keep us completely from going into war, I don't see us going in lightly in the way that we did there. I mean, we had this, just clearly as a nation, this sense of like incredible like arrogance about our own sort of bulletproofness, which
Invincibility.
was, yeah, right. Invincibility. Thank you. And to your point, is especially remarkable given that it was the Vietnam generation doing that. Now, what's interesting about that is when you look at the architects of that, when you look at the people who were really designing that policy, those are two people who were not in Vietnam, right? And so to me, it does mean that having somebody who can't just tell you what they read in a book, or what, or write you a paper about national security. And so to me, it does mean that having somebody who can't just tell you what they read in a book, or what, or write you a paper about national security, but somebody who knows what it smells like to be deployed. I do think that makes a difference in how much of a hair trigger you have, but also about how seriously you take equipping and preparing a mission of any type.
Let me focus on what I think is the dumbest decision of the wars, besides the decision to fire the first cruise missile at Iraq, commencing it in March 2003. And that is the disillusion of the Iraqi military by the American proconsul Paul Bremer. And you talked earlier in the conversation about decisions and being infuriated by bad decisions. I know, as someone who served in the Bush White House in 2005, was sent to Iraq for a period of a couple of months, and detailed to the ambassador as a political person, someone who ran campaigns. What we mostly share in common, the Jim Messinas and of the world and myself, is we're all C students who went to state universities. And there's a hierarchy in the White House, right? There's the political people, or kind of your greasy, dirty, low operators, and the high affairs of state, are left to the academics, the PhDs. There's a new book out, serious academic work that looks at the Iraq war called Confronting Saddam, and looks at the profound, and by profound, I mean profound dysfunction of the Bush national security apparatus under Condoleezza Rice. But this decision by L. Paul Bremer of Kissinger and Associates, Harvard degree, per usual, the idea that no more Iraqi army, you're out, no possibility of a job, as opposed to report to your bases for giant pay raises, new Ford trucks and mobile homes, is an extraordinary decision. And that decision by a man delegated to him by the president I worked for, caused America to lose the war in Iraq, one, but sentenced the country really to 20 years of war. It's the foundational decision to ISIS. It's among the dumbest decisions that any American has ever made. And I feel like we don't talk about these things. And it's important because we're on the edge of a whole season of new dumb decisions, that lurk immediately in front of us, that require some perspective around the past immediate dumb decisions. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's an extraordinary interview with the person who holds Paul Wolfowitz's old job with Jon Stewart, talking about the inability of the Pentagon to
I saw a clip,
pass an audit. And I think all of these things, are tied together, which was Jon Stewart's point, across the institution at a bureaucratic level, has nothing to do with politics. But talk about that from a decision-making, perspective, if you will. Am I being too harsh there?
No.
But I think that decision, which was not made by anybody who was ever elected to anything, is the most consequential decision, I think, that was made with regard to any of these wars, again, other than the go order for Iraq.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think before I even get into the decision, what's the saying is, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. My problem with that saying is that it assumes that in order to avoid repeating history, we have to actually study it. And it's just really damned hard to get people to study history. And so what worries me is that we have such a cultural allergy to actually meditating on our own failures and our own mistakes. And we have this dire need, and including within the Democratic Party, within the Republican Party, within the country as a whole, this thirsty need to go back and revise everything and make it, it wasn't totally our fault, and that's how we forget these things. So yeah, I'll tell you, that was the kind of decision that people at the low level in the Army, had you consulted them, would not have made, right? Like I can remember being in intelligence school just a couple years later, in 2005, and having a guy come in who was, he was an intelligence officer, had already been downrange, and he's briefing us on like an anti-terrorism block of learning, right? And he puts up on the screen like an org chart for a terrorism cell, right? And we're thinking we're in for this really technical briefing. And he's got, well, here's the bomb maker. And then this guy over here, he's the spotter. This guy over here, he digs the hole, he puts it in, and he goes through all these positions. And he goes, all right, now, who do you take out? And everybody's got different theories on who they take out, and then he's like, all right, how? And of course, we're all like these young Hua lieutenants. So we're like, all right, well, we do like a 4-man stack and all this stuff. And he goes, no. He goes, take any one of these fools and get them a job, you idiots. He was just like, that's it. It's all it is. Get these people a job, because they don't have a job. They don't have any honor or respect in their home because they don't have any money. Get them a decent job, employ them on the base. You're good to go. You've just broken up the terrorist cell. And that made perfect. You only had to tell us once, and like, we got it. And so, yeah, I think it was an epically bad decision. And you had all these, I mean, look at what the Taliban just did. Like, I'm in no way, like, I'm no fan of the Taliban, but look what they learned from the first time they took over. These people who are running passport offices and whatever, they're doing terrible things like sending the women home from government jobs. But who are they keeping there logistically? The people who were doing those jobs under the government of Afghanistan, right? The same guy who issues you your passport in Kabul right now is the guy who issued you your passport in Kabul 2.5 years ago, because the Taliban figured out, oh, if we don't make the trains run on time, it doesn't matter that we don't have elections. Like, they'll get rid of us. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Western virtuous democratic nation or the Taliban. You have to get the trash picked up. And so huge blunder. Yeah.